I've been reading 3 books a week now for the last 10 months. So if you're trying to build a regular reading habit, today I'm going to share how I do it and why reading is so important to me. So grab your cup of tea and let's dive into it. If you follow this channel, you would know that I am a pretty avid reader, and last year I read, for example, over 100 books. But what you might not know, if you haven't listened to my previous episodes on how I've built this reading habit, is that I wasn't always a big reader. I was when I was super young. So when I was in primary school, I loved reading, whether it was nonfiction or fiction. I really loved delving into books. But when I got into high school and then even through my early 20s, reading was something that I didn't engage in much at all outside of what I had to in school. And this, probably looking back now, had a lot to do with me just not connecting with the required reading that was assigned in school. It just didn't resonate with the kind of reading that interests me. And so I think having to prioritize that just put me off of reading in general. But when I was in closer to my mid-20s, I really started to get back into reading. And this started originally just prior to me starting my MBA. I had taken a few weeks off because I wanted to just reset before I started this study. And I was staying home with my grandma every day, learning to cook, and then also reading a book. So I would sit by her side and read a book after we did our cooking for the day. And it made me realize that I could get through books a lot quicker than I thought I could. And I'm not a fast reader. Even now, when people hear that I am really into reading, they just assume that I am a fast reader. And I can say that this is not the case at all. I think I would be an average speed reader at best, if anything, probably a slower reader, because I really like to try and take in every word, and I'll go back and reread things if I feel like I've just tuned out for a minute. So I'm definitely not a speed reader. It's something I would love to know more about, but I'm just not. So everything that I'll talk about today relates to, just being able to build this habit if you are just an average speed reader like I am. And the number of books that you read, to be clear, truly does not matter. The only reason why I try and set myself targets related to how much I read is because I know that if I have that, then it keeps up the habit and it keeps the momentum. So if your personal target is to read 12 books a year or 10 books or less, then that is still absolutely fine. I think what is harder for people to do sometimes is actually to create the habit to begin with. So whatever your goals are, I hope that some of what I share today, if you are struggling to build this habit, may help you to continue that more. Or if you are already a reader and you want to elevate that even further, then this might be how you can take that to another level as well. So the first thing that I would do is to join your e-library. So while the cost of an individual book can be a relatively affordable investment, this can add up if you are trying to build a regular reading habit. The first year that I really committed deeply to regular reading, I was trying to start with a book a week, and I estimated that this would have cost me close to $1,000, even purchasing ebooks as opposed to hard copy books. So this can really add up. So what I did after that was I invested instead into subscription platforms, and I did this for a little while. These are the platforms that are the equivalent of, say, Netflix for books, is the way that it's often positioned. And this worked well to begin with, especially when I was reading closer to a book a week. But what I found was, as I tried to increase this, the problem with these platforms is that they penalize you for reading too much. So while Netflix, for example, wants you to just keep binging and keep watching as much as possible, these platforms tend to have these quotas that if you go past that quota, then your available titles will start to get restricted, and that is something that I did find frustrating. So what I have done in more recent years is joined my local library, and then I have the app that is related to that. So I just borrow books from the library on my iPad instead of having to purchase them or having to actually go out and borrow them. And I think this is a big factor as to why I can keep reading, because there isn't as much of that having to go out and purchase the book or consider what my budget might be for buying books. So I'm able to just keep rolling with that habit because I use my e-library. And what I also find is that that exposes me to books that I probably never would have heard of. And because it is often a mixture of really popular titles and niche titles, it really allows me to gain a bigger perspective on the various topics that are out there outside of just the ones that get the most attention. The second thing that I do is that I like to set themes in my reading. But what I have done in the last year is that I've made this more flexible than I have in previous years. So as I've talked about in previous episodes, I used to have themes that had sort of sub-themes attached, but they were still quite rigid in a way. So in one year I read 52 books on finance, and I definitely don't regret that. I absolutely love having done that. And in other years I've had different themes. But this year what I wanted to do was just have a few broad ideas for themes. So I had a lot more than I would normally have. Some of them were related, some were completely unrelated, but it also just allowed me to just stay interested in reading in general. And what I really love noticing having this greater flexibility this year is that it allowed me to respond to my mood and world events better as well. So if I, for example, wanted to become more educated on a particular topic because it was particularly timely, then I could just really dive into all of the available books on that topic. Or if I just felt compelled to explore a different discipline, then I could start to dive into that without feeling restricted by the themes that I had set myself at the start of the year. Because when you think about the goals that you set at the start of the year, and if you follow this channel, you would know that I am really big on goal setting. But the problem is when you do set goals at the start of the year, it doesn't take into account that you are going to evolve and grow in that time as well. So your interests might change even within a year. So you might not actually have the same priorities. So you want to be able to move with your changing goals and your changing interests instead of having to wait for that next year to come around to make that a priority. Because you also never know where that could lead. You could start to pull on a certain thread and it could open up a whole field of possibilities that you just never thought was possible at the start of the year. The third thing that I do is that I also try and be really clear about my why for reading. Now, I've shared previously that there are several benefits to reading that I often think about on those days where I might not feel like reading. For example, I love to share that reading has been shown in research to be able to reduce stress. There was a study that showed that it can reduce stress by 68%. So it outperforms even a relaxing cup of tea, and it can work within 6 minutes. Reading has also been shown to improve your vocabulary and your communication skills, and also your knowledge. Researchers compared the knowledge of readers to TV watchers, and readers have been shown to have increased knowledge. Now, if you follow this channel, you would know that I am big on non-fiction. I did last year read all fiction books, and I read all of the classics that I had in this space, but this year I've gone back to non-fiction. But if you are a fiction reader, this also has really great benefits because the research has shown that it creates neurological pathways that are related to the characters. So what this does is that it strengthens your ability to have empathy for other people and your emotional intelligence as well. So if you are a fiction reader, know that you are getting a lot of benefits out of that too. The fourth thing that I've tried to think about a lot more in recent times is my motivation to counter this clip culture that has become so prevalent in our world now. So when you think about just how popular short form content has become, from YouTube Shorts to TikTok to Instagram stories and reels, this has really started to dominate the content space. And I do think that there are so many benefits that have come out of that, and it starts to get messages out to more people in a way that really connects particularly with younger generations. But what I also am really aware of is that by being consumed by clip culture, you lose a lot of the context. So you're just hearing, for example, a really nuanced topic explained in, say, 30 seconds. Or you could be building really strong opinions about people that you have potentially never met, based purely on the clips that you have seen about them. And I believe that in the world that we live in today, this can potentially breed a lot of hatred as well for people that you potentially don't know a lot about. And a lot of the time, this can stem from clips that you have seen other people create about their content, as opposed to even the clips that they have just originally created themselves, where all of that context is stripped away to generate a particular reaction from people. And so I think, along with obviously what long form podcasts and videos provide, books provide you that option to truly get to know someone's point of view, to actually understand their arguments and their perspectives in a much more nuanced way, to understand the research or the experience that has gone into them forming that particular opinion. So that's why I think that even in our current climate of clips and social media just being so quickly available, that it's still really important to have a regular reading habit so that you are actually being educated on topics in a much more in-depth way, and you're doing your research beyond what you see on social media. And this leads nicely into number 5, which is to outread AI. I would love to say to outsmart AI by reading, but I think we all know that the way that AI is progressing, it is likely going to outsmart humans if it hasn't already. But what I think is really important when it comes to reading is that it also provides you that opportunity, as I mentioned just earlier, to do more research, to have more context, because these large language models are sweeping the internet. They're trained and they sweep the internet, but they don't, because of obvious copyright reasons, have entire books uploaded to it. So for me, that seems to be one area where you're still getting really top level information when it comes to books, as opposed to the full in-depth analysis and arguments and perspectives that are offered in books. So that is why I think that even with all of the technology available in AI and all of the benefits that come with that at the moment, it is still so important to read and research as well via books. Number 6 is to read in your prime productivity. So when I talk to people about reading and they're aware of how much I read and they're wanting to build this habit themselves, what I find they often bring up, if it's something that they are struggling with, is that they find themselves falling asleep. And in previous years, and as I've probably shared in other episodes, I used to recommend that people read in the morning. This is what I do. I like to make this one of the first things that I do as part of my morning routine. But what I've thought about more recently is a lot of the research relating to people's prime productivity and the fact that people are either larks or owls, as they describe it. So a lark is your morning person and your owl is your night person. And that is why sometimes these, 5 a.m. club mentalities and own your morning doesn't actually work for everyone. I know even with my husband, he is much more of a night owl and I'm much more of a lark. And we just have these polar opposite productivity times in the day. And that's what made me realize that when people are potentially struggling with reading and building this into their routine, it could be because they're not doing it in the place that is best suited to them. So that's just something that you could potentially think about if you find yourself struggling with reading, is that maybe it's just not in your prime productivity space. And you could think about when you could actually shift this to and see if you're getting potentially different results. Which also leads nicely into number 7, which is to set a time in your schedule. Now, I know it's a cliche, but it is so true for me that whatever doesn't get scheduled doesn't get done. So if you follow this channel, you know that I talk a lot about habits on this channel, and I always find that the ones that I am able to maintain are the ones that are attached to particular times of my day and particular times of my week. And I might have the best intentions for absolutely everything that I want to do in terms of habits, but if it doesn't get scheduled into my week, it just does not happen. And so that's something that I also thought potentially if people are trying to build this regular reading habit and are struggling to do so, it could just be because you're not assigning it to a particular time, and reading might just be that thing that you do whenever everything else is done, and there's probably just potentially never a good time for it. So if you are prioritizing it, I think that makes it easier to do. It's almost like, as I think about this now, like setting a budget. So if you set a budget or you're paying yourself first, then you know that that is going to get done. But if you don't do that and you just sort of see whatever you're left with at, the end of the week or the end of your fortnight or month, it's probably just not going to be what you hoped it would be. But if you actually have some sort of a plan and you are prioritizing it, you're paying yourself first, then you're more likely going to do that. And number 8 is to have your next read ready. So this is something that I've mentioned a few times as well, because I do believe that this is a big factor in reducing that decision fatigue. So if you go back to Netflix, for example, and you think about how Netflix makes you always just want to watch that next episode because it already starts rolling, or whatever streaming platform you watch, usually the next episode is already playing. So it makes it really hard to stop that binging habit because you can already see the next thing. You've already gotten that next dopamine hit. So when it comes to your books, that's where I feel like having your next read ready, your next book ready, is going to help you to just keep that momentum going. So you don't have that decision fatigue. You don't have to do research. You just know, say if you do read in the morning, if you read at night, whenever it is, you just know that your book's just ready to go. So even between books, you just don't have that period where you're potentially just deciding what to read next. So that's something that I find useful for keeping that momentum going. So if you are trying to start a regular reading habit, then remember that this isn't about speed or volume. It's about curiosity, consistency, and intention. If you love books, particularly nonfiction or business books like I do, then check out my previous episode on my 40 top recommendations in this space. Thanks so much. Subscribe for more like this, and I'll see you in the next episode.